Welcome to NREI's Common Area Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the award-winning editorial staff at NREIonline.com. Let's jump right into this week's podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Common Area with your host, David Bodamer. Let's dive into this week's story. Good afternoon, David. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing this week?
I am doing fantastic. It is 2020, and I'm excited to still be here. This is good stuff.
Made it.
Yeah, I made it. Woohoo! Yeah, 9-year-old self is like really excited that I made it to this day because it means all sorts of futuristic things from the Jetsons, right?
Yeah, exactly. Roaring 20s 2.0.
Ah, nice. I like that. I haven't heard that yet, so I'm gonna write that one down. So, all right. So, what are we talking about today?
So today, basically, ever since President Trump has been elected, periodically we've done some surveys with our audience to gain some insights as to how commercial real estate pros feel about the president and his agenda, and specifically we also asked some specific questions around how they feel his presidency has affected the industry. We actually haven't done this with previous presidents, but one of the reasons we did it with Trump is because he originally came from the industry, so we thought it would be interesting to see how the industry he started with was going to view his presidency. So we've done this. I think this is the 6th time. We did it more often in the first couple of years, but it's actually been almost a year since the last time we actually queried our audience. So just given we chose now largely because of, on the heels of impeachment, we wanted to see what was happening then, but the pace of the world right now is just so crazy that we mostly conducted this survey before he ordered the strike that killed General Soleimani. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just important context because so we grabbed a picture of how people were feeling kind of end of December into early January and kind of just cut off before that event happened. So any changes in people's opinion based on that event are not captured in this survey. So I think that's just like important context.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I find it interesting. You said it's been about a year or so. Looking back at maybe last January and February is when you ran your last one, if I'm not mistaken. And, right. And December was a really tough month financially for the market, at least. I mean, it was a quick down and quick up right around Christmas. And so people were kind of, wait a second, what are we going to do? And I know that kind of trickles over a bit into, the real estate area as well. So I'm really interested because just this entire last year, they've had an entire year to think about it. Then you get the impeachment stuff and all the things that go with that. Yeah. We're talking politics, Dave. Why are we doing this today? I'm just kidding. I'm ready. Let's go.
So with all that, and then I think the other important piece of context for our surveys, we do ask people their political affiliations. Obviously we're not like a hardcore polling agency where we're doing specific samplings and all this. So we're relying on people to come back and answer us. But we get super high response rates whenever we do this. We got over 700 responses in just a couple of days. Of that, the average age of respondents is 56 and a half years old. So, and just over 40% identify as Republican, only 17% identify as Democrat, and then the other 40% or so identify as independents.
Really?
Yeah, so that's obviously a different profile than if you were just doing like a general population or if you were trying to capture the electorate. So we're talking about the commercial real estate industry. That doesn't surprise me that much, just this industry that tends to be more Republican. And I think I would hazard to guess a lot of the people that identify as independents are lean Republican, if not identify as Republican.
They were Republicans until Trump. Now they're like, I'm an independent. We get it. We certainly,
no judgment. Some of that happening in the world. So I think that's interesting context because, this is a audience that skews Republican, definitely doesn't skew Democrat. I mean, fewer than 20%. Mm-hmm. I think then when you sort of see the approval ratings, it's like taking that into account.
Yeah.
Given that this is our audience, what we've found is that generally he has a positive approval rating in the industry. Higher than in the general, than what you'll see in any of the, approval polls that Gallup or anybody will do. In this current one, he had a net approval of 48.5% approve of his performance versus 44% that disapprove. So it's like a slight, 4 percentage point or so net approval rating. I think what's the most interesting is like if we look back over time at the approval rating, the first 2 times we did this survey, which was like back in 2017, right after he took office, but important, and I think most importantly, was before he got the tax reform bill pushed through. He had pretty low approval ratings even among this audience, below 30% approval, and then fairly high, 60%. Once the Tax Cut and Jobs Act got through, I think a lot of people in this industry were like, okay, that was the most important thing that we wanted to see him do. He got it done. There were some specific things in that bill that were very, that were good for commercial real estate. So ever since then, his approval rating, when we've asked, has been over 40%, close to 50, sometimes close to 50%.
All right.
So that's where we sit today. So then, given the news of the day, we wanted to see how people felt about impeachment, which was, again, kind of an interesting response to that. I mean, not terribly different from the overall approval, but like 40% said they approve of the impeachment versus 53% who disapprove. Although I think it's still kind of, it's almost a 50-50 split. So
yeah,
even in our audience. And then asking who thought he should actually, whether they improved the impeachment, then also ask, well, do you think he should further be removed from office? 44% are in favor of his removal versus 56% who are against. Pretty almost the same numbers. Just there's like a 3%. I guess there's like this 3% gap that think he should be impeached but not removed. But everybody, everything else is fairly consistent. I think, outside of like the macro, outside of those macro events, the other piece of it is then stuff that we're interested in, that we've asked a lot about is, okay, well, how do you feel about his legislation? How do you feel about his legislative agenda as it pertains to our industry? This time we asked, what do you think about the tax reform bill? And, are you still happy with it at this point? On that front, he gets pretty, over 50% pretty much across the board. People, think only 15% disapprove of his agenda as it pertains to our industry. 53% support it, and then another 33% are neutral. So, but there's very few people, I think, who are sitting in the commercial real estate world and thinking about the things that are important, which would, include taxation, includes infrastructure, I guess immigration to some extent, just given like where it may affect some pockets of labor in the industry. And generally there's net approval, fairly strong net approval on that front for the Trump administration.
Gotcha. Yeah, it sounds to me like the lower percentage, 15% or so you said, and I'm not going to speculate too much, but either they're letting personal feelings get in get into this survey where they just don't approve of Trump as a person or as a human being or as a president, and maybe not taking just your industry into true account, or they have very specific lines that they're looking for, very specific things that they're looking to have done that haven't gotten done yet. And that's what they're waiting for to say any kind of approving message. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. Because I think the couple areas that come up where there is a little bit more negativity around his legislation is there's still a lot of mixed views on tariffs. And obviously I think tariffs have then some effect on the industry. Our industry is not particularly pro-tariff. So that could be an issue. So I think for some people it might be like, okay, on balance, it's like happy with the tax cut, not happy about the tariffs, but maybe net positive. But then like other people might be, no, I'm net neutral. Like given those, I guess it depends on how much you weigh each of those things. The other thing that he's been doing, for the past, I don't know, year at least is, he's been tweeting and making comments directly trying to influence what the Fed is doing. And that obviously will affect commercial real estate because, interest rates have a huge impact on this industry. And on that point in particular, more than half of our respondents don't approve of the way that he's doing that. So they're not happy that he's tried to influence the Fed's decision, and only 25% approve of the efforts. So I think you can then, have people who are like generally happy with the tax reform, maybe mixed on tariffs, but then, maybe he not really he shouldn't be doing some of the things he's doing. The Fed should be independent. And he kind of like put all those things together. Then you get I think that feeds into how you answer this question of like, how do you feel about his overall agenda for our industry? Right. I mean, that's kind of like how I look at these numbers and sort of, reconcile like where some of the moves, where some of the movement is, and so where some of the differences are, like, net approval versus approval on legislation versus approval on these specific issues.
Yeah, and this is just my personal thought, David. I don't know I think there's only one person, if you want to call it a person, that's happy that Trump tweets anything, and that's Twitter. I think Twitter is the only
from Twitter. Yeah.
Twitter is the only one that is happy that he hasn't a Twitter account at all, because he drives a lot of traffic to him. So good for them. But yeah. And but that's just my personal view. I don't know. There may be a percentage out there that just absolutely loves his tweets. Who knows?
Sure, there are. But we ask some, but we get, we can't publish them all, but we do ask some like open-ended comments, tell us what you think. And the story has a couple of those, but we get like sentiments like that too. Just exactly what you just said. People being like, I'm pretty happy with them, but I wish you wouldn't tweet so much. Because that kind of just makes everything crazy. Like if he just focused on these X, Y, and Z, things would be a little bit more settled. So, I mean, we've had comments along pretty consistently when we do these surveys that I've definitely seen sentiment along those lines.
Yeah, I think if we could do a little less tweeting and a little less golf, we'd get a little bit more work done. But that's just me.
Yeah. Just to put a button on the specific area of like our industry and Trump. The other big one that really hasn't gone anywhere is infrastructure. That's when we one of the questions we've asked is like, what are the top 3 issues you think that the president should be focused on? Infrastructure is like always number 1 for our audience.
Yeah.
Oh, like we want an infrastructure bill because obviously improving the country's infrastructure has clear implications for real estate. Like if you improve access to areas, or if you improve highways, that may create new development opportunities or may improve that property value. So there's all sorts of ways why that would make sense, and even investment opportunities potentially, given the way that like the way that he's originally talked about an infrastructure plan. It was this idea of public-private partnerships, using some creating some incentives, creating some financing structures to help fund private investment in real estate. That might create an opportunity for somebody who does real estate to get into maybe some kind of like infrastructure play, or some helping to develop something that's not pure commercial real estate, but maybe some overlap. And so I think people saw those kind of opportunities, or saw that sort of potential, and it just hasn't gone anywhere. It's never come to fruition. There's no legislation, like other than ideas, the sketched out ideas that kind of keep being brought up every so often. There's no concrete legislation that's being worked on or making its way through Congress. So it just doesn't seem like that's going to get done. Yeah. Even though that for our audience, that would be an important thing. Aside from that, I think then there's like a length. I'm not going to go through it, but like in the write-up we did on this is fairly long. So if people go to NREIonline.com per usual, they can find the story, and there's about a dozen charts with all of these data points and showing how the sentiments have shifted over time. I think one of the more interesting ones, it's like a giant graph, the one about which 3 issues are most important, because you could see on certain questions, like infrastructure is always important. So always 60% to 70% of respondents saying that's important. Healthcare, pretty important. I mean, I think that's obviously not really specific to commercial real estate, but that's obviously an important issue to Americans. Just getting some kind of healthcare, fixes into the system. Yeah. So that's up there. Then on some of these other questions, like there's been a lot of shifting over time. Tax reform started off pretty high, then tax reform got done. So obviously that's less important, but still some people want some more done there. But it went from being about 70% saying that's a top issue to about 20% saying, and now it's an important issue. Flip side, the people answering immigration has shifted. Like at one point it was barely anybody thought that was important. Then it kind of went up, and then it's kind of come back down again. People talking about debt, whether the federal debt and whether that should be addressed. At the beginning of his presidency, that was not a top 3 issue for a lot of people. Now it's I think up in the current survey was almost 30, 40, somewhere between 30 and 40% now concerned about the debt. So none of these are the most important issues, receive the most response in our survey, but just seeing how people's sentiments have shifted over the 6 times we've done the survey, I think was probably one of the more interesting things that we found.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. David, as I was reading this report, it each I thought it was interesting. People even made comments, and if you're listening to this podcast right now, you got to go read this entire thing. I mean, there's so much good information in here. But people actually made comments also about climate issues affecting real estate. And I never really thought about, sure, long term, if the planet dies off, yes, nobody needs a place to live, and then, there's nobody around. So, but I think one of the quotes was along the lines of, his climate ignorance threatens us all. Like, wow, that's a really strong statement. But do you see that when you are, talking to your peers? Is there a lot of concern about him not addressing climate change or anything to do with the climate when it comes to real estate itself? Do you really see that?
Interestingly, I don't know how widespread it is, but I have heard there was a recent conference I was at, a fairly large investor was talking about how they're no longer they're not buying any property in Florida anymore. And they're also very hesitant about investing in Houston and New Orleans, several markets that are at the most risk of near-term effects from rising sea levels or intense weather events. Mm-hmm. So, at least, I wouldn't say that I would think that that's a majority sentiment at this point in terms of how people are making decisions, but it's definitely in the market. And at least this one investor their investment thesis included factoring in which markets are most and least likely to be affected in the near term as to where they're going to buy property. In our survey, we didn't ask that as a specific issue. That's actually a good idea, I think, for if we do another one of these before the election, maybe to include a question about climate change. And I feel like it's such a weird discussion in the U.S. because in a lot of cases, we're still stuck at this weird debate about whether or not it's happening. And if you look at most other countries, that's not the debate. The debate is what to do about it. And basically how more market-based or state-based solutions, some mix of both, how fast do we need to move? I feel like in a lot of places, the left side of the debate is, we need to take drastic action, and then the right side is we can't affect the economy. Yes, but we have to do so in a way that won't damage the long-term economic prospects of the country at the same time. That's kind of the stakes of the debate. And here we're not even having it that way. We're having it as we're still is it happening or not? So, but I think there are a lot of people that are a lot of investors who don't think who know that it's a real thing, and if not being vocal about it, at least they're trying to figure out how it's going to affect what they're doing with their capital.
Well, we can start the whole conspiracy theory right here with finding out how much of California does Trump own that is on the east side of the San Andreas Fault, because sea levels rise, pressure on the tectonic plates. It's Superman all over again, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, this is the premise of Superman 2.
Exactly. Hello. You let the sea levels rise to a point, it pushes the tectonic plate, the San Andreas Fault goes, everything to the west is underwater, and you got beachfront property everywhere.
Right.
I just think we need to look into that. Maybe that's where he's investing all his money, and that's, he's the grand mastermind. Because if you remember, Lex Luthor was also bald, right? He wore a toupee.
Yes.
And there's been rumors. Okay. I don't know if it's real or not. I'm not going to check that.
Yeah, but Superman 2 is one of the most underrated real estate movies of all time.
That's exactly it. That's everybody's homework now. Listening to this podcast, learn from Superman 2. So, or whichever.
I mean, it actually is something we may want to get into for a future episode. It would be the top 5 movies where commercial real estate is a big plot point.
Yeah, like Twister, right? Twister's got to be in there. It's wiping the slate clean.
Glenn Ross is all about real estate. There's a few others, but that could be a fun discussion for another time.
I'll look forward to it. All right. Any closing thoughts for today's podcast?
Obviously, politics stirs people's opinions. So if If people have questions or comments about that story, people can leave comments on our site or shoot me an email, find us on Twitter, any of that good stuff.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this right now and you have a really good idea for us to do a podcast on instead of doing movie reviews, sure.
Yeah.
Email. Give us a suggestion. What do you want to learn about? What do you want us to discuss on the podcast that you can point to and that you can learn from? We'd love to entertain those ideas. So make sure you email those ideas in as well. David, thank you so much for your time today. This was fun.
All right. Thank you.
I never knew politics was going to be fun to talk about, but learn something new every day. Again, everybody out there listening, thank you for listening to the Common Area Podcast with David Bodamer. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when David comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your colleagues. Again, thanks so much for listening today. For everyone at NREI, this is Eric Johnson inviting you back in 2 weeks for all the stories that matter to you. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Common Area Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of NREI or Informa. The content has been made available for information and educational purposes only.